Welcome to The Writer's Dream. Our show is a show where authors are able to talk about how they write their books, how they publish them, and how they market their books. We are on Facebook. We have a page called The Writer's Dream. Please, if you have any questions, address them to Facebook. I look at that website very often. We are also on YouTube. All of our shows are on YouTube. We have about 100 interviews so far. And newly, we are on Pinterest. So if you're interested in the show, please take a look at our social media. We'll be happy to answer any questions. If you are an author and you're interested in being on the show, please go onto my website, which is just my name, Linda Maria Frank, and so you can find the contact information there. Our guest today is Roland Allnach. He is a repeat offender here at the Writer's Dream. He is a writer of short story anthologies, and his short stories, to me, because of the era I belong to, are reminiscent of thriller,
Twilight Zone.
The Other Side, yes, and Twilight Zone, and a little bit of Stephen King in there too. They're very, very interesting, a little science fiction, a little mysticism, very, very entertaining story. So, Roland, tell us about how you got into writing anthologies of this type. First of all, give me a description of, a better description than what I gave of your stories.
Okay, I was really inspired by classical literature. So those types of stories written when you go back through Tolstoy, Homer, Shakespeare, Kafka, that whole range. The way they treat characters, develop characters, the way they bring people to life on the page, that's really lit a fire under me to really write and expand and try to get published and be an author. But I always had an interest growing up in reading science fiction and horror movies, so I just thought it's interesting to take those familiar mechanisms, those time-honored mechanisms of literature, and apply them to these new and different or just strange ideas and make them feel all the more striking because you have a character investment, because it's alive on the page.
Well, I think in this day and age, we have more strange coming down the pike than we've ever dreamed possible. So it's definitely a fertile field for writing these kinds of stories. So tell us about your first book.
Okay, my first book, Remnant, it was a combination of science fiction, speculative fiction. Really, it's 3 different novellas. It's about characters trying to rediscover their moral centers and their identity in the face of really strange situations that are thrust upon them. It is a science fiction setting, so it does take place towards the future. It's 3 different settings for the 3 different stories, but as the book progresses, there is almost a regression from the abstract technological aspect to the personal aspect, and that's how the thematic loop of the book closes. So it brings home the strange situations inside people, the characters, until they settle themselves.
Well, why are, I don't write science fiction, why are science fiction stories always, not always, but oftentimes set in the future?
Well, part of the original idea with science fiction is to give you a viewpoint, to separate your viewpoint from the common and the everyday.
That makes sense.
And through that, it's allegory. Through that, give you another perspective to now look back and see things in a different light. With science fiction, you can drape the familiar with the new and unexpected, but underneath the idea is always that, that there are certain hallmarks to the human character, and now you can highlight those through situations, foreign and future situations, that you create within the framework of your story. The challenge of science fiction is trying to keep that new setting cohesive and logical rather than having it break down. But that's, challenge is always the fun of creating the story.
Absolutely a challenge. Now, this book won an award?
Yes, Remnant won 5 awards. Oddities and Entities has won 8 awards. That's my second book.
Wow.
So extremely happy with that critical and award success.
Well, we were co-award winners.
Yes, we were.
I actually won another one with them.
Excellent.
I entered it a second time. This is the author show.
Right.
50 great writers you should be reading.
Yes. That's actually number 13, but so
oh, that's great.
I don't try to attribute that directly because I try to lead it as more as that's something for my writing in general, authors you should be reading. So, yeah, it goes with oddities and entities, but it's really for my writing in general. So, yay to that.
All right, so what's, they're both, all three books are anthologies,
Yes.
but is there a different theme in these two before we get to prison?
Yes, with Remnant, like I said, it was more for characters try to find their inner truth. That's something that I think resonates through all the stories I write. One of your prime literary elements is catharsis, internal struggle, so that's always going to be there. But with Oddities and Entities, I try to, as character-driven as it is, I try to externalize that a little bit, and because it's all contemporary, try to take characters and bring in supernatural or paranormal elements and some speculative elements as well that really are going to fracture them from the society that we know and not necessarily comfortable with in its reality, but comfortable with in its familiarity. So the characters are all somewhat on the fringe, they're outsiders, so to speak. That at once aids the strange things that come into their life, but it leaves a fertile ground for them to already be thinking a little bit outside the box. So while they can then blend with the new things coming into their life, it allows for the more, say, philosophical aspects of the story, where they can look back and try to employ ideas that maybe most of us would not consider to resolve their differences and find some kind of harmony to their existence.
So definitely these are stories that have a very different twist to them.
Yes, I like to think that as a writer, one of the things that sets my stories apart, is that while they are entertaining from the first read, I try to layer them so that upon a second or a third or hopefully a fourth or more reading, the reader continues to get extra meaning out of them. Because to me, that's life in general. You live your life, and hindsight, you look back and your brain has a natural inclination to put things in order. Hindsight allows you to look back at your life and see things that maybe you didn't appreciate while things were happening. But in hindsight, you understand how your personality drove decisions you make or created opportunities that you had, situations that you experienced. So I like to weave that element into my stories so that upon a second read, there's a little bit of foreshadowing that people may not appreciate the first time reading through or perceive the first time reading through. It's subtle, but it brings the story more together as a cohesive whole, just like hindsight would bring your life together.
So your story is really two layers. It's probably more than that, but there's the story. There's the stuff that happened. And then the second layer that I see is what happens to your character, how your character grows through the story, which I think is the thing that makes literature live, makes stories live. I mean, I love to read Stephen King, but I don't really like to read about vampires. I don't like, vampires, that's all like weird. Okay, but what happens to me is I'll read his story and I fall in love with the characters and what's happening to the characters. The characters are immersed in this nutsiness, to my way of thinking, because like you, I have a scientific background and everything's very ordered and logical and, God forbid we should believe in the mystical. But, I mean, not that I don't, but the characters draw me in. They always draw me in. I want to see what happens to them, and I want them to survive, and I want them, because the stories sometimes are such that you don't know if they're going to survive. So, yeah, I think most people, when they're reading a story, it's the sympathy with the characters that holds them. Fine if you have a good setting and a good story, but it's got to be the characters.
Well, character is really the reader's portal into the story. One of the little things I like to say over again is that if it's not real for your character, it's not going to be real for your reader.
It's true.
So if your characters go through the story and they're not really affected by it, they don't seem emotionally invested in it, the reader isn't going to feel a reason to be invested in it. And that's not just to say if something happens, the character should be scared. It's the thought process. It's the internalization. Because that's something that goes on in every person, maybe subconsciously, but one of the nice things with prose is you get to explore that level as well with introspection.
Right. I think as long as you're bringing out what the characters are feeling, it doesn't necessarily have to be what you feel. I mean, you can read a book about a serial killer, and you're certainly not going to think like the serial killer. But what will draw you in is understanding how that thought process is going on. So I think that's very important. How about Prism? Let's talk about
Okay,
Prism. This is
Prism.
your latest.
Yes, this is my latest book. So excited to have this one out. This is a combination of my published short fiction, previously published short fiction, which has won a few awards as well. And the other half of it is new unpublished pieces. And my goal with this book, one of the things I liked looking back as I was publishing my short stories leading up to my first two books, was seeing how, in retrospect, my literary voice, my writing itself developed. Because you know yourself as an author, when you start in this business, you have to settle into yourself. Like any other creative pursuit, it is a performance, so to speak. And until you gain that confidence of knowing where you are really comfortable in presenting your work, you really can't go beyond and develop into something new. So what I enjoyed with looking back at my short story track record was seeing how what ideas were developing more through different stories. And even though they're all different settings, different genres, each one is its own piece, there's that underlying element that continued to develop. So what I wanted to do with the book, putting them together, was one, give them a fresh edit to bring them up to where I feel my skills are now. Mm-hmm. And two, to really just take a reader by a hand and take them on a journey from one end of the scope to the other and lead them through different genres, different narrative forms, prose form, poetic form, tragic form, and just try to explore literature itself. See, and I think a lot of that comes from my inspiration from classical literature. I love the writing itself, you know, reading other people's writing. It's really what lights the candle underneath me and gets me going to do this. And to have that all together and have a diverse collection, you know, it's always a risk when you do something different. But I feel like I can say, you know, I put a book together that not too many other people have done. Not that they can't, but just that they haven't. So it's always a risk.
We were talking about this before, about the fact that a single author anthology is not always the best seller, but the difference here is you're telling stories pretty much in the same literary form. And in here, in Prism, you're telling the same good, engaging stories, but you're using all these, I mean, it's up here on the cover, fantasy, horror, epic, tragedy, fiction, and mythical, which like myth. So that's really a very different, I think, approach.
Thank you.
Of how to present a book. So what's your greatest challenge, not marketing, we'll get to that,
Okay.
but what's your greatest challenge as a writer?
As a writer is just staying focused from one story to the next. I'm always trying to develop a couple of different ideas in my head at the same time. Always trying to develop a couple of different characters at the same time. Because my stories are character driven, I start writing my story when I'm settled on a character. I have the ideas. The ideas to me are just, you know, collections of circumstances. They don't live unless I find a character to mate with them that jives with them. So once I have that together, then I sit down and write.
So your characters are all different in these different
They're all
stories.
different characters, yes.
Okay, yeah.
All,
See, I'm lucky I only have one.
all the little voices in my head.
All the little voices. Okay, well, that's really what, you know, that's writing. People have said to me, I've had this argument with people about writing as an art form, and people will say to me, well, writing's not really art. You know, usually this is trying to get like a book fair into an art gallery, or some sort of a literary event into an art gallery, and they'll say, well, the writing's not an art form. And I just look at them and I say, you know, you guys, you work with clay, you work with paint, you work with ink. I said, I have to work with the synapses in my brain. What more of an art form, you know, could you possibly come up with that's so original and so, not that every piece of writing you do is original, but it's original to you.
Well, I think what's different with writing and being an author is there's no immediacy to people experiencing it. A statue, a painting, music, a stage performance, somebody can just look for a few seconds and get drawn in. With a book, it's very different. Someone has to sit and take the time and invest the time to read. I think that's part of why authors are so respectful of their readers, because they understand that, knowing having written the book, the process, the time, the emotional investment involved. But I think of all the creative pursuits, being an author is probably one of the most difficult, because in some ways I think authors have a lot to relate with actors, because
Yeah,
as the
that's
author you have to summon different characters in your head, you have to bring them to life. In some ways I think actors are almost like sculptors, because they take the raw material that an author or a writer may have created, and now they bring it to life in a physical form for people to watch. But there's that framework that the author has built. And to be honest, nobody's going to take an interest in it past the point where somebody want to do a live performance of something, or bring it to life physically, if it doesn't have something that resonates as being alive in itself.
That's right.
So,
And I think by virtue of what you said, an actor can actually make a very dull character in a book really come alive
oh yeah,
through their own craft. So,
Well, yeah.
it's very subjective.
yes. And one of the things that they always say about being an author is there's not a story that hasn't been written before.
That's right.
Just write it in a way that only you could write it. And I think if you look at authors that really have a lot of success, or whose work is really complimented, they have told stories in a way that is theirs and only theirs. And I think, going back to the corollary to actors, I think, as he said, a dull character could be made alive by a good actor. If you look at certain performances that actors have done over the years, you'll see there are certain roles that after you see the portrayal, you can't imagine anybody else having done that character. They own it. So I feel as authors, we have the same responsibility when we write our stories, is you should write it in a way that, somebody else could paraphrase it, but they can never capture it the way you captured it. And that's the part of you as the author that will carry through your stories and make them your own.
It's your writer's DNA.
It's your writer's DNA, your literary voice, which is, something I wanted to do with this, is try to display my literary voice.
Well, I interview a lot of authors, and a lot of authors tell some very good stories and have some very good books. But I look at these books and I say these are works of literature. They have they transcend that bestseller, good story type of label, and I would consider these as really good literature. I've seen you on other venues doing readings, and the stories are really, really good and so beautifully written.
Oh, thank you very much.
Greatest challenge to the author?
Greatest challenge to the author? Well, that would be marketing. After your book is written, it's always marketing.
Yes.
And and I've went through this myself. I think every author goes through it. When you do your first book, the publication date comes, and you think, okay, I'm on the bus. Let's get ready for the ride, and you realize that it's not going anywhere.
Bus ain't going anywhere.
That's right. There's no driver. There's no one on there but you. You have to take it by the nose and lead it along. And it's a huge learning curve. Requires a lot of dedication. And the word I always use is persistence. You have to persist.
It's just like they say that you should write every day. Well, you have to market every day.
Yeah.
Just about every day. And I know myself, I say, I want a day off. I just want a day off from this. And I'm doing a blog tour, as you are, and the questions from the interviewers are, well, how many hours a day do you spend writing? Well, ask me how many hours a day I spend writing text for websites and answering your questions and various kinds of blurbs for the book. I spend a lot of time writing that, or articles that support my writing. And I would love to get down to that fourth book and write it. So yeah, it's really, and it's such a challenge. I like what you said about how you market, because you said that selling a one-author anthology is very difficult. There's not a big market. So tell me about how you went about making sure that people would see this one-author anthology.
Well, I started with the idea of doing a one-author anthology because they say you should try to do something different. So I figured, well, this is what could set me apart. Was not quite aware how apart that would set me. The anthology market it's kind of a curious creature, because most of the anthologies that are better known in the book business are ones that are supported by publishers from the get-go. They say we want to recruit stories for a particular theme, and they're building the publicity for the book as the stories are being submitted and accepted. So by the time the book comes out, you can have people really anxious to read it because it's been hyped for so long. As a single author anthology, you don't have that benefit. You know, you're working within your author's realm there, your little mindset. Your book comes out, and now you have to market it. What I discovered with my first book is that so much of the marketing business and the publicity world is geared towards novels. So to try to fit that, you're really trying to fit a square peg in a proverbial round hole. But I figured, well, what could I do that could set me apart, and from not just other anthologies, but just set me apart as an author, build a foundation, the author's so-called author's platform. So I started looking at what do good books have in common? They have good professional reviews, and they have awards. So I started submitting and collecting my reviews, and it was, it's very comforting and very gratifying, but it's nice when reviews come back, and I have to say with all three books, the professional reviews have been overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah, I've read them, and they are overwhelmingly positive. They're actually really good.
Yeah, it's a little surprising sometimes when I'm like, hey, they're talking about me.
Yeah.
But that in conjunction with the awards, and there's no guarantee with these things. You don't know how well your book is going to be reviewed till it's reviewed. You don't know how you're going to do in an award competition until the competition passes and you find out whether you've been recognized or not. But these are things that I feel, not only for the individual titles themselves, but as an author, this builds your awareness. Now you can go around and you can say, I've won multi-awards, or whichever particular award you want to cite if you want to target a particular market. The critical acclaim from professional reviewers, I think, has a worth that is almost understated, because they are professional reviewers. Their critiques, while being objective, will also have a little subjective element in there. But while it's great to have ordinary readers, regular people, basically your market, your people, read your book and like it, I think a lot of times their interest in a book they don't know can be shaped by awards, professional reviews, things that are considered impartial, things that are looked upon as weighing one title against another, such as an award. So I think people can really warm up to that.
I also think because of the fact that your books are works of literature, rather than a one-shot bestseller type thing, I think that's the way to go. And I think the thing that we find the most difficult as authors is the time that it takes for recognition.
Yes.
You have to think about all of the authors out there who languished their lives and were never recognized till they died.
Right.
And I'm not really looking forward to that. But it is a time-consuming. First of all, you have to look at the profession and the number of people you are competing with, the number of books, let's put it that way, that you're competing with. I used to give a workshop, probably still would do the workshop on self-publishing, and people would say, well, when do you expect your book to be successful? And it's always in a library or a bookstore, and I go like this, and I say, look at all these books in this bookstore. I said, they all got written, they all got published, they all got into the bookstore, into the library. How many of each book do you think is sold each day? And that gives you like a perspective of what you're up against.
Well, I think a big misconception about authors, I should say, is that you get a book published. Now it's simple. There's going to be money. There's going to be fame. There's going to be this big reader base, and it's a misconception. I think the market itself is partially responsible for, because the idea of fast, easy success will draw people. This brings in submissions to publishers. It brings in marketing dollars to advertisers. So there's a certain momentum there that they want to present to people. But for those of us inside the industry who have been published, it's a real eye-opener to realize just how difficult it is. And when you look at the statistics for even books that have made the bestseller list, these are authors, while they may have much greater name recognition, if you look at the dollars and cents behind that, it's really not what people would expect it to be. And in some cases, it can be shocking. So Yeah, certainly an uphill battle, but I think that the nice thing with writing, even though, like we were saying before, that having that immediate impression that you can do with other creative forms, it's a very gradual slope for your snowball to roll down. But if you have that persistence to stick with it, one, you will learn a great deal along the way, which I think will only help your writing. But when you do start to get a little momentum, at that point, if you have a couple of titles behind you, not only does that help you support you because you have other things for people to read, but I think people can really get a sense of who you are and where you want to go with your writing, and you can build a reader base that way. You have to be patient. It's like push-pull is a marketing term, but I think in reality it is very much a push-pull situation. You have to try to push your books out there, try to push to get attention, and then wait for your writing to stand on its own and then pull people in. Because if what you do in any creative pursuit, if the substance is not there, you may draw attention right off the mark, but it's not going to linger. It's going to be forgettable,
Yeah,
and that's that.
I think that's something that, if you're serious about it, you know, if you're not in it just to get that bestseller, that's what you think about. So let me repeat about your books. This is Roland Allnach, and he has written 3 wonderful anthologies. If you really like the different, the outre, the out there, then I really suggest these books. It's Remnants. I think it's Remnants, Oddities and Entities,
Yep,
whichever
Remnants,
way it went.
Oddities and Entities,
and
then
Prism.
Prism.
And I just think they're very different, very well worth reading, and I think another venue for you is probably college professor. Not you, but as to get your books out there.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
So
Thank you very much.
it was a pleasure having you.
Yes, thank you.